Welcome to another edition of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. And, you know, I've got a very interesting story that it comes from The Intercept, which is the website that was created by Glenn Greenwald, who is famous for publishing the documents that were leaked to him by Edward Snowden. He left The Guardian sometime, I think it was earlier this year, possibly late last year, and started his own website called firstlook.org. And on there, he has something called The Intercept. And there is new information that is being leaked, and apparently this is stuff that did not come from Edward Snowden. This story is actually titled Barack Obama's Secret Terrorist Tracking System by the Numbers. And the very first sentence of the article is what grabbed my attention. It says nearly half of the people on the U.S. government's widely shared database of terrorist suspects are not connected to any known terrorist group, according to classified government documents obtained by The Intercept. Of the 680,000 people caught up in the government's terrorist screening database, a watch list of, quote, known or suspected terrorists, end quote, that is shared with local law enforcement agencies, private contractors, and foreign governments, more than 40% are described by the government as having no recognized terrorist group affiliation. That category of 280,000 people dwarfs the number of watch-listed people who have suspected on the list who are suspected of having ties to Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah combined. The documents obtained from a source in the intelligence community also reveal that the Obama administration has presided over an unprecedented expansion of the terrorist screening system. Since taking office, Obama has boosted the number of people on the no-fly list more than tenfold to an all-time high of 47,000 people. David Gomez, a former senior FBI special agent, says, if everything is terrorism, then nothing is terrorism. The watch listing system, he adds, is revving out of control. And then there is a graph. It's actually more of a pie chart that shows which groups and sort of the percentage of the pie, if you will, of people on the list as far as total numbers and the various affiliations. Hezbollah has about 22,000 people on the list. There are about the same that are suspected of being members of Hamas that are on the list. And then Al-Qaeda actually has a couple of different listings on this group. They have Al-Qaeda with just over 50,000. Then there is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and then Al-Shabaab Haqqani Network, which is also in some ways affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and then Al-Qaeda in Iraq has a listing of 73,000 people, 62,794 people on the terrorist list, or rather the supposed terrorist list, are suspected of being affiliated with the Taliban. About 92,000, almost 93,000 are listed as being members of or suspected members of other recognized terrorist groups. And then, of course, 280,000 people on the list are not affiliated with any recognized terrorist group. The article continues. It says, the classified documents were prepared by the National Counterterrorism Center, the lead agency for tracking individuals with suspected links to international terrorism. It was stamped secret and no foreign, that's NOFORN, indicating that they were not to be shared with foreign governments. They offer the most complete numerical picture of the watch listing system to date. Among the revelations, the second highest concentration of people designated as known or suspected terrorists by the government is in Dearborn, Michigan, a city of 96,000 that has the largest percentage of, take a wild guess, yes, that's right, Arab American residents. The largest percentage of Arab American residents in the United States live in Dearborn, Michigan. So it doesn't really seem surprising that Dearborn, Michigan, again, has the second highest concentration of people on the list of suspected or known terrorists. The U.S. government adds names to its database or adds information on existing suspects at a rate of 900 records per day, which means that when this information came out in the middle of last week, was on the 5th of August. So since then, there have been approximately 4,000 more people added to the terrorist list, or suspected terrorist list, or maybe we think that that guy ate lunch with somebody that talked to a terrorist that one time list. Yep. So even though, we know what these numbers were on a certain day, they also know that approximately 900 records get added per day. The CIA uses a previously unknown program codenamed Hydra to secretly access databases maintained by foreign countries and extract data to add to the watch list. A U.S. counterterrorism official familiar with watch listing told The Intercept that as of November of last year, there were approximately 700,000 people in the Terrorist Screening Database, or TSDB for short, but declined to provide the current number. Last month, the Associated Press, citing federal court filings by government lawyers, reported that there had been 1.5 million names added to the watch list over the last 5 years. Now, that doesn't mean that there's still 1.5 million people on the list, just that 1.5 million people had been added, and, obviously some of those people have been removed. The government official told The Intercept that it was a misinterpretation of the data. The list has grown somewhat since that time, but it is nowhere near the 1.5 million figure cited in recent news reports. He added that the statistics cited by the AP did not include nominations of individuals, or rather, does not just include nominations of individuals, but also bits of intelligence or biographical information obtained on watch-listed persons. When U.S. officials refer to the watch list, they typically mean the TSDB, again, the Terrorist Screening Database, an unclassified pool of information shared across the intelligence community and the military, as well as with local law enforcement, foreign governments, and private contractors. According to the government's watch listing guidelines published by The Intercept last month, officials do not need concrete facts or irrefutable evidence to secretly place someone on the list, only a vague and elastic standard of reasonable suspicion. And as I have mentioned on this show before, because I donate money to antiwar.com, and antiwar.com is being investigated by the FBI, then there's a very good chance that I'm being investigated by the FBI, which means that if somehow they can connect you to me, they might wind up putting you on some kind of list too. Does that mean you shouldn't listen to the show? Hell no! Share it with all your friends. Let's get everybody on the planet on their list. Because again, if everything is terrorism, nothing is terrorism. Stay tuned. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. I'm going over the article here from The Intercept that apparently over 40% of the people on the terrorist watch list, or actually the terrorist screening database that the U.S. government has that they share with pretty much everybody that wants to look at it, unless you're a regular person. And about 40% of the people on that list are, quote unquote, not affiliated with any known terrorist organization. Former FBI agent David Gomez says if everything is terrorism, then nothing is terrorism, but they only need reasonable suspicion to add someone to the list of possible terrorists. And one thing that, I'm not saying that they're going to wind up doing, but it would not surprise me if they start compiling a list of Bitcoin users. And, I like using Bitcoin. And as I said in the last segment, I think that, as many people as possible should just wind up trying to do things that clog up their list. Because, again, if everything is terrorism, then nothing is terrorism. And I like Bitcoin, and I have a couple of Bitcoin wallets and a service that you can use to purchase Bitcoin. Of course, you need to set up a Bitcoin wallet, and you can do that through blockchain.info anonymously, although you do have to work to keep your anonymity when you use Bitcoin. But you can set up an anonymous wallet on blockchain.info, and after you do that, you need to buy some Bitcoin, and one way you can do that is through Express Coins. And I now have an affiliate agreement with Express Coins, so if you have never purchased from them before, and you get started by going through my affiliate link, expresscoin.fppradio.com, then they will send me a commission on the first purchase that you make, as long as that purchase is over $40 worth of Bitcoin, because they don't charge a fee on purchases of under $40. You can use cash deposit, bank wire transfers, also send them a money order or check. And again, get started. Go to expresscoin.fppradio.com. So back to the article here. Again, former FBI agent David Gomez, who spoke with The Intercept to sort of provide some insight about the terrorist screening database that they obtained from some whistleblower. It was not Edward Snowden. Gomez says, you need some fact basis to say a guy is a terrorist, that you know to a probable cause standard that he is a terrorist. Then, I say, build as big a file as you can on him. But if you just suspect that somebody is a terrorist, not so much. The National Counterterrorism Center did not respond to questions by The Intercept about its terrorist screening system. Instead, in a statement, it praised the watch listing system as a critical layer in our counterterrorism defense and described it as superior to the pre-9/11 process for tracking threats, which relied on lists that were typed or handwritten in card catalogs and ledgers. The White House also declined to comment. Surprise, surprise. The article here continues. It says, most people placed on the government's watch list begin in a larger classified system known as the Terrorist Identities Data Mart Environment, also called TIDE. The TIDE database actually allows for targeting people based on far less evidence than the already lax standards used for placing people on the watch list. A more expansive and invasive database, TIDE's information is shared across the U.S. intelligence community, as well as with commando units from the Special Operations Command and with domestic agencies such as the New York City Police Department. Oh, isn't that wonderful that the New York City Police Department have access to basically the entirety of what sort of spying is being done by the U.S. government? It's so wonderful to see them working hand in hand to bring us tyranny. In the summer of 2013, officials celebrated what one classified document prepared by the National Counterterrorism Center refers to as a milestone, boosting the number of people in the TIDE database to a total of 1 million, up from 500,000 4 years earlier. The document credits that historic achievement to the Directorate of Terrorist Identities, a secretive and virtually unknown U.S. counterterrorism unit responsible for maintaining TIDE. The document declares, "This number is a testament to DTI's hard work and dedication over the past 2.5 years. The number is also a testament to the Obama administration's intensified collection of personal information on individuals with suspected links to terrorism." In 2006, CBS News obtained a copy of the no-fly list and reported that it included 44,000 names, including the name of Bolivian President Evo Morales and the head of Lebanon's parliament. Faced with a widespread public backlash, the government cut the list down to just 4,000 names by late 2009. The next year, after the so-called underwear bomber tried to, and I hate the way they describe this, where they say he tried to bring down a commercial airline bound for Detroit. He tried to light his underpants on fire and couldn't get the lighter to work. And furthermore, this guy didn't start out on a flight in the United States. He was on a flight coming over from the Middle East. So that's not a failure of the American TSA, although I would say that the American TSA is a failed organization. But to cite the underwear bomber as a failure of American national security is ludicrous and absurd and shows how little people pay attention, because this guy didn't go through an American TSA checkpoint. He got on a plane in some foreign country, and I forget which country it was, but that country has pretty strict security as well. But nonetheless, the article here says that after the so-called underwear bomber tried to bring down a commercial airliner bound for Detroit, Obama loosened the criteria for adding people to the no-fly list. The impact was immediate. Since 2010, the classified documents note, the National Counterterrorism Center has created more than 430,000 terrorism-related person records, while deleting about 50,000 people whose nexus to terrorism was refuted or did not meet current watch listing criteria. The documents reveal that more than 240 TIDE nominations are now processed each day. There's more. Oh, there's more. So stay tuned to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I'm covering the article here from The Intercept titled Barack Obama's Secret Terrorist Tracking System by the Numbers. And, you know, this is even more disturbing. The further I read into this, it is more disturbing than I had originally thought. I had read the first, 4 paragraphs a couple of days ago and decided, wow, this is a really great story. I have to cover this. I have to talk about this. And now the more I read, the scarier it is. There's a quote here from former FBI agent Michael German, who is now a fellow at New York University's Brennan Center for Justice, who says you might as well have a blue wand and just pretend there's magic in it, because that's what they're doing with this, pretending that it works. These agencies see terrorism as a winning card for them. They get more resources. They know that they can just wave that card around and the American public will be afraid, and Congress and the courts will allow them to get away with whatever they're doing under the national security umbrella. Now, the watch list by the numbers. In the documents, the government emphasizes that it seeks to add only as many people to the tied list as are necessary for our nation's counterterrorism mission. Tied being the Terrorist Identities Data Mart Environment list. And it continues here, with hundreds of new nominations coming in every day, the numbers provide only a momentary snapshot of a watch list system that is in constant motion. In August of last year, or rather an August 2013 slide from the National Counterterrorism Center called Tied by the Numbers lays out the scope of the Obama administration's watch listing system and those it is targeting. According to that document, which notes that the numbers are approximate, 680,000 people have been watch-listed, with another 320,000 monitored by the larger Tide database. As of August of last year, 5,000 Americans were on the watch list, while another 15,800 Americans were targeted in Tide. Among the other revelations on the document, 16,000 people, including 1,200 Americans, have been classified as selectees who are targeted for enhanced screening at airports and border crossings. There are 611,000 men on the main terrorist watch list and 39,000 women on that list. The top nominating agency responsible for placing on the government's watch list are the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, an organization I have never heard of, the National Security Agency, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The top 5 cities represented on the main watch list for known or suspected terrorists are New York City, Dearborn, Michigan, which, as noted earlier in the show, surprise, surprise, has the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the United States. Houston, San Diego, and Chicago round out the list. At 96,000 residents, Dearborn, Michigan is much smaller than the other cities in the top 5, suggesting that its significant Muslim population, approximately 40% of its population, is of Arab descent, according to the Census Bureau, has been disproportionately targeted for watch listing. Residents and civil liberties advocates have frequently argued that the Muslim, Arab, and Sikh communities in and around Dearborn are unfairly targeted by invasive law enforcement probes, unlawful profiling, and racism. Dawood Walid, executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, told The Intercept, "To my knowledge, there have been no Muslims in Dearborn who have committed acts of terrorism against our country." Walid added that the high concentration of Dearborn residents in the watch listing system just confirms the type of engagement the government has with our community, as seeing us as perpetual suspects. The documents also offer a glimpse into which groups the government is targeting in its counterterrorism missions. And before getting to that, there is in the article a very large graphic that shows that in 2001 there were 16 people on the no transport list, and as of the releasing of this document, which was dated of last year, there are 47,000 people currently on the no-fly list. So back to the article now. It says the groups with the largest number of targeted people on the main terrorist watch list, aside from no recognized terrorist affiliation, are Al-Qaeda in Iraq with 73,000, the Taliban with just under 63,000, and Al-Qaeda without any added location, such as Iraq, Arab Peninsula, etc., at 50,446. Those are followed by Hamas and Hezbollah, both with just under 22,000. Although the Obama administration has repeatedly asserted that al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula poses the most significant external terrorist threat to the United States, the 8,200 people identified as being tied to that group actually represent the smallest category on the list of the top 10 recognized terrorist organizations. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is outnumbered by people suspected to have ties to the Pakistani-based Haqqani Network, the Colombia-based FARC, and the Somali-based Al-Shabaab. The documents also revealed that as of last year, the U.S. has designated 3,200 people as known or suspected terrorists associated with the war in Syria. Among them are 715 Europeans and Canadians, as well as 41 Americans. Matt Olson, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, recently claimed that there are more than 12,000 foreign fighters in Syria, including more than 1,000 Westerners and roughly 100 Americans. And no mention of the fact that in Syria, the U.S. government is actually covertly providing some of these Syrian rebels with weaponry. So it seems kind of ironic to me that the U.S. government would, on the one hand, be providing weaponry to people, while on the other hand saying, oh, yeah, by the way, they're terrorists. The article continues with information on biometric data. According to the documents, the government does much more than simply stop watch-listed people at airports. It also covertly collects and analyzes a wide range of personal information about those individuals, including facial images, fingerprints, and iris scans. In the aftermath of last year's Boston Marathon bombing, the Directorate of Terrorist Identities began an aggressive campaign to collect biometric data and other information on all Americans on the tied list. The document notes, this project includes record-by-record research of each person in relevant Department of State and intelligence community databases, as well as bulk data requests for information. The DTI also worked on the subsequent Chicago Marathon, performing deep dives for biometric and other data on people in the Midwest whose names were similar to those on the tied list. And I say similar to because I know for a fact that there are people who are on the watch list who have fairly common names, which means that every person with that name winds up getting caught up in this little dragnet operation. So they say that they're only searching for people whose names are on the list, but it could be somebody with another name, like a different person with the same name that are getting caught up in this dragnet and having their irises scanned. Stay tuned. There's more. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. And I'll get back to the article here from The Intercept in just a moment. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about a project that I am in the works on fundraising for. In March of next year, I am planning what I am calling Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the Road, to where, in the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I will take what I am calling the Not a Bus. I recently obtained a minibus that is being converted into sort of an RV-type vehicle. I will take that on the road And, again, in the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I will take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road over a period of 104 days. During that time, I will still continue producing media daily. What is now a 2-hour show on Sundays will become a 30-minute, 3-time per week podcast that will be produced. I will continue producing the daily 5-minute FPP radio news. I will continue writing at least weekly content. A lot of times it's focused on commentary. Sometimes it's just the news. But I will continue producing all of that, as well as making YouTube videos with the people that I meet along the way. So, for instance, I will be stopping in Pensacola, Florida, and going to see the fine folks at Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. I'll make a video with them. I will go out to Sean's Outpost, make a video out there. And then from there, I'm going to the Texas Bitcoin Conference. I will make several videos there. Another stop is going to be Denver, Colorado, where I will visit the wonderful people at Amagi Metals and make videos with them. And there are still places that have not been added to the map. So if you go to tour.fppradio.com, you can wind up donating and possibly get your city added to the map, because I'm wanting to stop in at least 10 cities across the country. I would love to make it a nice even dozen. And when I say stop in, I mean actually stay for a couple of days, go to some Liberty meetups. Maybe you've got a college group that you would love me to speak to. I will, gladly give presentations and speeches along the way. So, again, go to tour.fppradio.com to find out more about the trip or to donate, because all of the donations will definitely be beneficial in making that trip happen. So, back to the article here from The Intercept about the ever-growing terrorist watch list. The last thing that I mentioned in the previous segment was that DTI, which is one of the organizations working on building these terrorist watch list, in Chicago, at the Chicago Marathon, they performed what they called deep dives for biometric and other data on people in the Midwest who had names that were also names on one of the more expansive lists called the Tide list. In the process, the Directorate pulled the Tide records of every person with an Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin driver's license. DTI's efforts in Boston and Chicago are part of a broader push to obtain biometric information on the more than 1 million people who are targeted on that secret database. This includes hundreds of thousands of people who were not even watch-listed. In 2013, the Directorate's Biometric Analysis Branch, or BAB, launched an initiative to obtain biometric data from driver's license records across the country. At least 15 states and the District of Columbia are working with the Directorate to facilitate access to facial images from driver's licenses. In fiscal year 2013, 2,400 such images were provided for inclusion in the secret Tide database. According to documents, BAB offers its unique skill of facial identification support to a broad customer base. Last year, its analysis produced more than 290 reports for other government entities, including the CIA, the New York Police Department, and the military's Elite Special Operations Command. All told, the classified documents show the government compiles strikingly detailed dossiers of data on individuals who have been swept up in its databases. Though some of the documents obtained by The Intercept offer conflicting information on how much biometric data the government collects. The more detailed report shows that in 2013, the main terrorism database included more than 860,000 biometric files on 144,000 people. The database contains more than 500,000 facial images, nearly 250,000 fingerprints, and 70,000 iris scans. The government maintains biometric data on the people that it hasn't identified. Tide contains 1,800 BUPs, or biometrics of unknown persons. In a single year, the government expanded its collection of non-traditional biometric data to include dramatic increases in handwriting samples, signatures, scars, marks, and tattoos, and DNA strands. Talk about scary stuff. The article continues. There's a quote here from Hina Shamsi, the director of the American Civil Liberties Union National Security Project, who says, "We're getting into Minority Report territory when being friends with the wrong person can mean the government puts you in a database and adds DMV photos, iris scans, and facial recognition technology to track you secretly and without your knowledge. The fact that this information can be shared with agencies from the CIA to the NYPD, which are not known for protecting civil liberties, brings us closer to an invasive and rights-violating government surveillance society at home and abroad." The DTI also goes far beyond accessing information from state driver's licenses. In managing the main terrorism database, the Directorate coordinates with the CIA and the National Media Exploitation Center, a Pentagon wing responsible for analyzing and disseminating paper documents, electronic media, videotapes, audio tapes, and electronic equipment seized abroad in military or intelligence operations. By sharing information with the military, the National Counterterrorism Center asserts the DTI is able to obtain additional data fusion points by accessing and exploiting NMEC data holdings. In return, the Directorate provides NMEC with a classified biometric search capability against Tide through automated and manual facial identification support. The DTI also harvests information from CIA sources, including the secret database called Cinema, which is short for the CIA Information Needs Management, and a secret CIA program called Hydra, which utilizes clandestinely acquired foreign government information to enhance the quality of select populations in Tide. In 2013, DTI and CIA ran a proof of concept for Hydra using Pakistan as a guinea pig. The DTI provides the CIA with a list of 555 Pakistanis in the Tide database. After inputting the names into Hydra, the CIA vetted these names against Pakistani passports and provided biographical and biometric information to the DTI. Pleased with its initial success, the government plans to expand its clandestine data mining operations. Future initiatives, the document notes, will include additional targeted countries. The CIA, of course, declined to comment on the program. So there you have it. That's the report from The Intercept, and there are numerous links throughout this article that I have linked over at the Facebook and Twitter for Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. The Facebook page being facebook.com/Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. The Twitter being my personal Twitter at Darryl W. Perry. Stay tuned, because next hour, you think this is some sci-fi weirdo stuff? I've got a sci-fi guy coming on the show. Scott Bieser from Quantum Vibe will be on the show. So stay tuned. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. And yes, this is hour number 2, which means It's interview hour. My guest this week is none other than Scott Bieser. Scott is the creator of Quantum Vibe, which is a daily web comic, but it's more than just a daily web comic because you can actually go to these antiquated things called bookstores and you can order copies. And I just think it's really cool that, because I like having things made of paper that are bound that I can then hold in my hand when I read. So, Scott, thank you for taking some time out of your Sunday to come on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
So, I know that I did not give as wonderful an introduction of you as I could have. So, for the people that aren't familiar with you, Scott Bieser, the person, or Quantum Vibe, your webcomic, can you just give us an introduction of yourself and your work?
Oh, my goodness, that's kind of broad. Well, I'm a middle-aged widower living in Houston, Texas, and I've been cartooning in various avenues and in various formats for most of my life, pretty much, since college, getting paid for it. And I've worked in computer games, and I've worked for the Libertarian Party of Texas back in the 80s and 90s, and so I've sort of had that art mixed with my libertarian philosophy for quite some time.
So it seems as though you are sort of the stereotypical libertarian. You mentioned computer games, which, from there involves, coding and other computer nerdery.
Yeah, well, as an artist, though, not as a coder.
But, that's sort of, graphics design. There have been people that have joked that the Free State Project should be called the Graphics Design Project because there's so many graphic designers that have moved here and people that do other things involving, like IT, because that's one of the jobs to where you can pretty much do from anywhere. You don't have an office that you necessarily need to go to. I just think it's, kind of odd that, you are so stereotypical in your libertarian sort of outfit, if you will.
Yeah, well, I guess I came by it honestly. I really fell into the computer games business back in 1989 when I had been freelancing for one of the independent comic book companies, Malibu Graphics. And someone in that company knew a guy that was starting a small computer game company down in Costa Mesa. And he was looking for a, quote, cartoonist who was familiar with computers, end quote. And I had just gotten a Macintosh a year or so previously and had taught myself to use that and the graphic software on it. So I was a rare bird in those days, whereas, 20 years later, it's a completely different story. So sometimes it's just, being ready to move and jump in any direction when an opportunity presents itself. And that's what I did. And it worked really well for a long time.
And Quantum Vibe, which is your daily web comic, it is set in the future in, what is it, the year 2523?
Starts in 2523, that's right. And moves through about a 2-year span over the grand story arc of that plan.
And if people are new to the comic and they go to quantumvibe.com right now, obviously they will not see the very first graphic or, the first comic on the landing page.
But it's easy to get to. We got buttons for Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3, which is the current volume. You hit the Volume 1 button, and you go right back to the first cartoon in Volume 1. Or we have another button that gives you a sort of Cliff Notes version, a story this far. And click of that, and you get basically about 6 different strips. It hits all the main parts of the plot and introduces the main characters and gets you ready to go pretty much up to the present, or maybe back at least a few weeks, because I can only update these things so often.
Right. And for those of us who don't necessarily have the time right now while listening to go read the Cliff Notes, can you give us the Cliff Notes version of the Cliff Notes version?
Oh, very, very simply, yes. Set 500 years in the future, mankind has spread through and colonized most of the solar system, but hasn't really made it to the stars for lack of a economically practical, faster than light drive, and also the fact that deep interstellar space is a lot more hazardous and difficult to navigate for complex reasons I don't need to get into now. So anyways, we're stuck in the solar system. They're starting to kind of bump up against the frontier. The frontier is closing. Some people are worried about that because they think, and they've seen through experience that freedom tends to thrive when the frontier expands, or at least that's this one guy's theory. So he has a theory of a new way to find a different frontier by finding a way to go from one alternative historical timeline to the next, and that way you go far enough and you'll find timelines where humans had never developed it. So you have a essentially virgin solar system you can go back and recolonize, and it's easy because you already know where everything is. So that's this one guy's dream, this mad scientist, and he hires a bright young woman to be his technical assistant and sort of Girl Friday to accompany him on this tour through the solar system that he has to do as part of this grand project to find a way to breach the alternate universes. And
hold on, so jumping between universes, that definitely sounds like something that is not possible in reality. Do you think that maybe in 500 years it will be? In 500 years, given enough time and enough expansion of understanding of science and technology, it's hard to imagine what's not possible. So, considering the leaps that we've made in the last 500 years, and considering, how much we've learned since then, and how our understanding is growing exponentially, we'll probably understand more about the universe in just 100 years than we've learned in the last 1,000. So, do you think that there's a alternate universe right now to where Scott Bieser has already created the ability to jump between parallel universes? It may be possible. I don't think it's very likely, but it could happen. I don't know. It all depends on how history developed in that other timeline, and it's impossible to say what's there. So, in your webcomic, set 500 years in the future, there's a mad scientist, that's your term, not mine, who is working on developing something to jump between universes to find the most freedom. Right. Or to find a new frontier so that freedom can continue to flourish. Now, in the year 2524, or whatever year it is right now in the Quantum Vibe universe, what sort of currency are they using to transact business? Well, they're using it's eventually, with a little bit of bumps and basically false turns, have come up with a concept for essentially a melding of gold and silver and Bitcoin. So you would have an essentially electronic currency that was still somehow connected to a store of precious metals. And the fact that there's a lot of precious metals in the asteroids is fine because wealth is expanding so fast that it kind of balances out. And it's also a free currency thing, because if people find a particular form of the currency isn't serving them, they just switch to a different one. Okay, so there's competing and complementary currencies in your future. And there's also competing social systems, and I think that's probably more the point of this thing is our heroes come from a space station in space, or a space city that is sort of an extension of Gerard K. O'Neill's old idea of the space colony at the L5 point, the Lagrange 5 point, out in orbit around the Earth on the moon's track. I'm not explaining this very well. And so I built a great big gigantic city with 10 million people in it, and it is an anarcho-capitalist municipality. Okay, I want to find out more about the city of 10 million people that may or may not have multiple societies. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. My guest is Scott Bieser, the creator of Quantum Vibe Comics, which actually Quantum Vibe is part of Big Head Press, and
Right.
Big Head Press is run by you and your brother, correct?
That's right, my brother Frank. He's my partner in crime, I guess. And we found a Big Head Press from the beginning so that we could put out a couple of books that had kind of fallen into our laps, one being a drug war carol, and the other being a graphic novel adaptation of The Probability Roach, which was written by O'Neill Smith back in the late 1970s.
And Quantum Vibe, how long have you been doing Quantum Vibe now?
I've almost lost track. It's going on 4 years now. And it's basically the eighth of a string of projects I started doing back in 2002 after I got laid off and kind of crashed and burned in the computer games business, and had to do a new career and essentially going back to an old love, which was comics, which I'd actually been doing part-time back during the 1980s, during the black and white independent era. But Quantum Vibe, about 4 years, I think, now, and pushing through. We'll probably be finishing up this current story arc in next April, I'm hoping. Things tend to kind of draw out because sometimes the characters demand a little bit more development than I planned to give them when I was doing the outline.
And you had mentioned that in the year 2523 or 2524, wherever it is right now in the story, that there's a city of 10 million people, and you described that as an anarcho-capitalist society.
Right.
So,
it's a proprietary municipality. Basically, there are several modules, including one of the biggest and oldest, which was where it started from, and then other essentially giant stations sort of aggregating attached to it, all having signed contracts based on a charter, which is very close to something like the Shire pledge.
okay.
And also has some certain practical rules having to do with, well, there's certain things that actually, the integrity of the atmosphere and the pressure in the whole station has to be guaranteed, and there's certain procedural things that they do as well. So it's not like there's governance, and there is one central sort of aggregate power, but it's extremely limited in what it's able to do. Essentially, one is it guarantees the integrity of the atmosphere because it's something that everyone is equally dependent on, and the other is it deals with all the various other entities on the other planets that might try to muscle in, and it's protection for the outside and also atmospheric integrity, and then other than that, everyone just does whatever they want to do that's peaceful.
So would you say that that's sort of a polycentric society?
It's polycentric in terms of how the people deal with one another inside that cocoon that's set up by the shell company, the Mercantile Corporation form that was set up to essentially protect L5 City from all the other mercantile corporations. And when people have disputes with one another, they have their own domain. What are they called? Dispute resolution organizations that go under different terms: insurance companies, arbitration associations, and various social societies that have this sort of network of different kind of interlocking arrangements and relationships, so that as disputes rise among people, there are institutions in place that can resolve them peacefully, so you don't have internecine warfare within what happens when you get a bunch of killer apes together in one place.
Right. And of the 8 planets in this solar system, and I use the number 8 because that's what is scientifically recognized, since Pluto has been rejected.
Pluto was demoted.
They got kicked out of the Planet Club, and they should probably actually wind up being in a special category of like dual planet, because Pluto is smaller than its moon, and they have an axis around one another that's between the two. But
the very
of
center,
the 8 recognized planets in the solar system and the hundreds of moons that revolve around some of those planets, how many of those are actually inhabited or inhabitable?
Well, a few of them are, almost none of them are inhabitable without a lot of technology. So far, only our moon, which is called Luna in the story, and Mars, which is called Huaxing in the story because it was settled by Chinese people. Those have been terraformed. So you have shirt sleeve, atmosphere conditions, and people can live just fine. Everywhere, everything else is in some kind of sealed pressure arrangement, a station or an underground or some hollowed out asteroids and that sort of thing.
So is there life on Titan? That's I forget if it's Saturn or Jupiter, but
Titan
is
Saturn's moon. Yeah, and
that
we haven't
moon
got
has
to Saturn yet.
Always fascinated me because it is the only moon that is known to exist in anywhere that actually has its own atmosphere and there's volcanoes. Yeah,
it has a very interesting and active surface. The problem with Titan is it's also more inhospitable. Because it has that atmosphere and the volcanoes and all that sort of thing, it's difficult and dangerous for humans and their machinery because the extremes of cold and chemical interaction. There are stations down on Titan, and there's quite a lot of stuff in orbit around Titan, basically peeling off some of the methane out of its atmosphere because that's useful as for various petrochemical and that sort of thing, but it's not a go-to place. I mean, it's out there on the outskirts still. It's not a place anyone really wants to go unless they are going there to make some money or to, for political reasons. Some of these other mercantile corporations are very statist and very authoritarian, and they have outposts out there just so that they have an outpost out there.
And is there sort of a solar system-wide government, I guess, some sort of equivalent to the United Nations?
Not as such. There are 6 major powers. 2 of them are based on Earth, one on each of the larger inhabited worlds, one each for Luna and Huaxing, and also L5 City. And then the other inhabited moons and moonlets and asteroids are essentially colonies or outposts. Oh, I'm sorry. The asteroid belt also has its own sort of common defense system that they call Joe's Diner, which is really complicated to explain. But it's all these mining outposts essentially banded together to throw off the mercantile corporations if they didn't like dominating them and establish their own mutual protective agency.
All right, stay tuned. More with Scott Bieser when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. And before we get back to Scott Bieser, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They now take Bitcoin for purchasing precious metals, so you can turn some of your profits into a long-term investment. And I know you have some profits, especially if you bought some of the Bitcoins when I did, but unlike me, hopefully you wound up, not selling all of them to make purchases. So if you still have some Bitcoin and you have some profits, then call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, 800-874-9760. You can turn some of your Bitcoin profits into long-term investments. And I really love the silver that they offer there at Roberts & Roberts. They have, pretty much anything that you can think of that you would want that is silver and has actually been minted or produced, or whatever sort of term you want to use to describe the making of rounds and ingots. But they also have silver bullets. Now, you can't fire these out of your weaponry to kill a werewolf, but you can certainly, hold on to them to ward off the evil inflation monster that we know exists and will continue to exist as long as governments print money. So get some of your ammo against inflation by calling Roberts and Roberts Brokerage, 800-874-9760. Back to Scott Bieser, who is my guest. And Scott, I only have a couple more questions about Quantum Vibe before we actually wind up, talking about who is Scott Bieser, the person. So in the year 2523 or 24, approximately 500 years into the future, the solar system is being mostly inhabited, and you said that there's like 6 major political powers. Is there war in the
there have been in
society
the past
that exists there?
There had been in some of the backstory, and I allude to a few of them occasionally. A couple of fairly major interplanetary wars between the 6 powers, one of which essentially ended one of the powers and a new one just rose up to take its place. There's a lot of backstory that I've only very lightly touched on. I'm trying not to be didactic with this thing. This story is really about the characters and what happens to them and how the things that happen to them change it, because that's what people really want to read about mostly. The philosophy is the background and the groundwork that I build everything on. And I wanted to take this approach because there's so much entertainment, and especially science fiction, which I love out there, that has this sort of socialist assumption to it. That, well, of course the government's going to be leading the charge out into space, and of course the government's going to be running everything in the future. And of course, anyone that's not, part of the Starfleet is probably crooked and so on and so forth. And I wanted to come from a different angle that assumes what libertarians understand about justice and about how people ought to interact. And I take these characters, one of whom is very old and experienced and wise in the ways of civilization, and then another one, a young person that grew up in libertarian paradise, and see how they deal with these different situations that they're confronted with as they go from world to world, most of which are different varieties of statist. And then there's one that's pretty much as free as L5 City out in the asteroid belt, but there's problems there too with shady characters lurking in the background trying to wreak havoc for fun and profit. So I wanted to write a story that libertarians as well as other people could enjoy reading, and libertarians in particular could enjoy without grinding their teeth, and having to essentially set aside their disagreement with the viewpoint of the author in order to enjoy the other part of the story.
And it sounds as though you are also not being very preachy in your comic. And that's one of the criticisms about a lot of libertarian fiction, is that, it's all built around one character who gets to give an epic speech at some point throughout the story. And I don't know if that is, because that was sort of the layout that was presented to people through Ayn Rand, who I actually cannot read. I tried reading Atlas Shrugged, and I made it to about page 35 and said, nothing has happened yet, and then I just set the book aside. And I still have ownership of the book somewhere.
Yeah. Well, Rand is really a Russian novelist, even though she moved to the United States and learned English. But she wrote a Russian story, essentially underscoring her rather unique viewpoint. But there's other traditions along those lines. Robert A. Heinlein, who most people would agree is much more readable, but he was also fairly didactic in a lot of the passages of his stories. And L. Neil Smith, who's a good friend of mine, and somewhat of a mentor of mine. He has a mix fairly close to Heinlein's. And, I appreciate his stories, and I think those kinds of stories are important and useful. But now that the field is expanding and there's more and more libertarians and more of us, finding new niches to fill, I think that some unexplored territory is what I'm trying to do now in Quantum Vibe, where I'm just say, well, of course, liberty. And let's have this fun story with these characters doing these fantastic things in it.
So speaking of course, liberty, one of the things that is why we are both on this radio program right now is liberty. And, everybody that comes to the ideas has sort of a different path. And it's one of the questions that I love asking because I love hearing people describe their journey, if you will, to where they are, now in life. And of course, in 5 years, they are probably going to, be somewhere else in life. If you don't continue growing, then, you've obviously done something wrong with your life. But,
right.
You are obviously, a fairly well established in your libertarian principles. So how did you sort of start on your path to liberty and then get to where you are now?
Well, I sort of have to shuffle my feet a little bit here and kind of say, well, I guess I'm pretty typical. I discovered Ayn Rand in college, not through her fiction, but through one of the nonfiction collections of her essays that had been collected in the trade paperback. I found it in a rack of the store in the Student Union at North Texas State University, where I went my first year. And irony within irony that I would find a path to liberty in a state university bookstore. And I said, well, this woman is nuts, but it also intrigued me at the same time. And so I bought a bunch of the other stuff, and I actually checked books out of the library for her major fictional works, because those were one of them. I think the Fountainhead was out of print at the time, and Atlas Shrugged was kind of expensive to pick up, and I was a college student. So anyway, I read all that stuff, and I never really completely bought into objectivism, but I really liked the non-aggression principle that was part of it. And so the following year, I went down to the University of Texas at Austin to continue college, and I ran into some other libertarians, and they had the usual literature table and set of books, including a lot of books by Murray Rothbard, who was kind of on the rise at that point. And so I went from being not quite an objectivist to a Rothbardian heretic, going into sort of an anarcho-capitalist viewpoint. And I've pretty much hovered around that ever since. I had experiences when I was working in the Libertarian Party of Texas where I got a bit more statist and more minarchist in my outlook, and I think I said and did a few things back then, and I'm kind of cringe when I remember.
All right, hold your thoughts, Scott.
Yeah.
We will finish, or not finish, but yeah, we'll finish down the Scott Bieser road to liberty when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. My guest is Scott Bieser, the creator of Quantum Vibe. And Scott, you were explaining your path to liberty that began at North Texas State University, which is probably most famous for the movie Necessary Roughness, where the team depicted in that movie was none other than the North Texas State Mean Green, I believe, is their team name.
That was them, yeah.
And
I wasn't involved in that.
And then you wound up going to the University of Texas in Austin, which is the largest branch of the UT system. And right. You said that you started off by reading Ayn Rand, and then you became a, quote, Rothbardian heretic?
Yeah.
Can you explain that term? Because that's not something I've ever heard before.
Well, it sort of has to do with what caused the split between the people that were friends and followers of Murray Rothbard and the objectivists, which was, okay, you start with the non-aggression principle, you apply it consistently, and then you must conclude that no state is ethically possible, because a state is essentially an institution that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence for defensive or retributive purposes in a society. And just the fact that it's a monopoly, is a coercive monopoly, is a violation of the non-aggression principle. So it's a basic contradiction. And the objectivists will say, well, you're not applying the principle properly, and the Rothbardians say, well, yes, we are. So we have to find out, we have to work out how a no state solution works. And so I went down the path and read a lot of Rothbard. Also read David Friedman, The Machinery of Freedom. So we had both a utilitarian and an ontological description and foundation for what is sometimes called anarcho-capitalism, and I kind of like voluntarism more better. I think it really expresses both the feeling as well as the thought behind where I'm coming from these days.
And you said that you went through a minarchist phase when working for the Libertarian Party. Sort of describe that phase for us.
Well, I became a little overly concerned with the workings of the political machinery. And everything was about, collecting signatures and getting on the ballot and making sure that the party didn't stray, into some legally frightening areas. And one of them was there's a provision in Texas law that says that no political party that advocates violent overthrow of the government is allowed to be on the ballot. And at the same time, there was an activist, a friend of mine actually, but we came to a disagreement on this point at the time. Although in the end, I think he was right. He wanted to add a plank to both the state LP and the national LP platform, essentially outlining that people have a right to use violence in self-defense, including against the government. Now, I know that those two that's not necessarily the same thing as advocating violent overthrow, but it could very easily be construed that way, and it could be used to keep the Libertarian Party off the ballot. So what I had done was essentially make a choice in favor of cleaving to the corrupt system that we work in, as opposed to standing up for libertarian principle. And I came to regret that. And I wish I hadn't, and I owe Jeffrey Rogers Hummel a big fat apology for getting in his way of getting that into the party platform, although, as it turns out, I don't think the party is relevant as we hoped it would be when we were trying to build it back in the 80s.
Completely understand you on the point about the party not being as relevant as people would hope that it would be, but the plank that you had mentioned about being able to use defense or use weaponry in anything deemed to be defense of self against the government seems to contradict the libertarian pledge that I don't know if Texas requires that this pledge be signed.
I do not advocate violence in the pursuit of political or social goals, or words to that effect. Yeah. Well, there was also, again, it's how you want to interpret that. I mean, if you're, if you're trying to defend yourself against a specific application of violence by the state against your person, that's a little bit different than going in and essentially charging into Congress and taking it over by force of arms.
Right, but some people could, some people do make the assumption and the claim, and that's why they wind up getting, disinvited from events like Porkfest, is that they claim that, any government agent anywhere just by being a government agent is committing an act of aggression, and therefore it is okay to go in and use any force necessary to remove them from their office. So I think it's one of these sort of slippery sort of things
It's a tricky area and kind of a dangerous one, especially in today's political climate, although I do think those questions really do need to be aired and explored.
Right. And I think that, we do need to have the discussion, but as soon as someone says, this isn't practical, okay, then let's end that discussion and have a discussion about what is practical. Because I'm all about, offering real solutions to problems, and if somebody admits that their, quote-unquote solution isn't practical, I want to have a discussion about what is practical. So I can certainly, respect where you were coming from of wanting to make sure that the party stayed compliant with the regulations, because having a libertarian to vote for is a lot better than not having a libertarian to vote for. Assuming that someone still goes to the voting booth to sort of cast a ballot of dissent, and that's how I view voting. It is the one day out of the year to where it is appropriate for me to use a government system to express my dissent with their system, if you will, because I can't really go to the city council meeting and just stand up and start telling people how bad the city council is, because most city council meetings don't allow people to just get up and start talking. Of course, I do go to the state legislature and talk to legislative committees and tell them that, what you're doing is wrong. And, this bill right here, while it's not great, it would certainly be a step in the right direction to, stop throwing people in jail for possessing plants. So there are very few times in which it is appropriate to, express dissent with the government. So I view voting as one of those times.
Well, you can look at voting as expressing dissent, or you could also look at it as essentially trying to impose a ruler on someone else who disagrees with you, and that's that's Wendy McElroy's argument, and that is why she believes that voting is immoral. And I haven't really completely resolved that in my mind. I quit voting about almost 14 years ago because I didn't really see that it was doing any good, and just the whole election and political process seemed to me to be a great waste of at least my time and energy. But I also recognize that everyone has their own path to follow, and some people might find practical uses for the Libertarian Party to actually do some good with it. And I have seen that at the level of various state parties, especially with Ernie Hancock and his people. They know how to use the party form and the functions and the state laws to do excellent street theater and sort of public demonstrations of just how corrupt the government has become, so that maybe more people's eyes can get opened.
Yeah, and one of the things out there in Arizona is, as part of their clean elections, which is basically taxpayer-funded election campaigns, that, of course, the libertarians opt out of. But part of that law says that if any candidate receives the clean elections funding, then all candidates must be invited to a televised debate, and all candidates accepting clean election funds must appear at least one such debate. So by having a libertarian in the race and knowing that everybody has to go to at least one televised debate, it's a great way to get out the libertarian ideas, because people will actually wind up watching those and hearing something that they wouldn't have heard otherwise. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show. Give the website where people can find you real quick.
www.quantumvibe.com.
quantumvibe.com for Scott Bieser, and fppradio.com for more of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Tune in again.